Please be seated. In the story of Jesus that we read a few moments ago, Abraham tells a great and a very sad truth. It is about wealth and is about human fate. And it involves a contradiction that we can think of as a great X that is drawn across our lives. There's actually a word for this. This is a chiastic story. It has two parts to it that directly cross over and contradict each other. That's chiastic. So in your minds or with me, you can draw this great X across the story and what it is teaching us in these days. Now, one line of this X is Lazarus. He's sick, he's bleeding, he's licked by dogs, he's starving and begging just to survive from one day to the next. And if we read the text carefully, he can't even get where he needs to go. Somebody has to bring and lay him at the door of the rich man so he can eat whatever is left over, the crumbs from his table. But then he died, this Lazarus. He died, and the angels took him straight up to be with Abraham, to be embraced by Abraham in heaven. Now, the other line on this X is the rich man. The rich man lived up there. He was just a recipient of all the good things that this world had to offer. It's the other line of the X. He lived well. He ate well, really well. He had parties. He invited his friends over. He had fine clothes and all that sort of thing. And so presumably he had all that he could have wanted out of life. And he died, and he went straight to terrible punishment down the other side of our X. And his punishment was especially severe, since he could look up to heaven and see Lazarus in companionship with Father Abraham. That's the great X, the chiastic story. There is such a word as chiastic, by the way. Just look in the dictionary. There are two lines in this X story, and that's what we want to look at this morning. We have to sort out just where we fit in this story. Usually we read this as a story that Jesus tells people, and Jesus is telling that story from him to us, and we get the moral of the story and we move on. But what if we find ourselves in this story? Because remember, Jesus is speaking this to us. He is preaching to us. How do we take it as we understand the word coming to us today? In many ways, this story brings us hard up against the struggles, the choices, the terrible tearing that we have in life, being drawn into many different directions. These difficult choices that we face, sometimes very hard and terrible choices that happens in our own lives. How do we take this story home? So we ask, for example, should our children live the sacred line and find themselves with Abraham in heaven? Well, yeah, but we don't want them to live in misery like Lazarus. So what do we do about that? We want the best for them in this world. Well, that puts them on the line like the rich man. We want them to prosper, to enjoy life, to be successful. But how can we follow a life of misery, as we saw in Lazarus, just to get the final reward? It makes no sense by all the values that we have been instructed with in our own lives. So where do we fit in this story? How does it imprint itself on us? Where does the X make its mark on us? Why do we work so hard to succeed, literally to become well off like the rich man? That's what we're after in life, is to do something at least somewhat well off so we can enjoy life to some extent. But if truth be told, no matter how hard we work, how hard we struggle, we invest, we send our kids to good colleges, we get the highest paying jobs we can, we struggle to make the best living we possibly just like the rich man. But unlike the rich man, we still fear death as much as we fear the misery and the suffering of Lazarus' life. Somehow we can't get off this great X, this crossed over line that constitutes human existence. Actually, we are often spread-eagled by these choices. We're stretched out on this great X. We struggle for some success of the rich man, but we cannot shake off the fear of our own end of death itself. We want to find a place with Abraham in heaven, but we're terrified of the cost in pain, of self-denial, of all the hard choices we would have to make in life just to do that sort of thing. Here we find an example of the classic Lutheran phrase that we, and it's the truth, we are both saints and sinners. We are two people at cross purposes, in crossed fates, unable to find a single direction in our lives. And for that reason, we need God's grace. We want to live the classic Christian life, but we still fear death and the grave and the future and failure. Then we take another look at this great X, and by the grace of God, it gives us a new vision. But now we see these crossed lines, not as the X, but as the Greek letter, and that Greek letter is called Chi. Now, if we translate that to English, it isn't X at all. It's CH. It's the first letter of Christ's name. That's what this is. It's a sign of our baptism, a sign that the ripping contradictions of our lives, shaped this exact way, are taken up by Jesus Christ as a sign of our baptism, a sign that we are given grace and salvation in the one who went to the cross. It's actually this Greek letter, Chi, as we call it, not X, but Chi, the first letter of Christ's name. Often, I looked around here and I didn't see it. Churches often have X's or Chi's like that all over the place, because that's a very fundamental Christian symbol. And I'm sure if I went somewhere here or looked in some bulletins or church literature, you'd find it. Often with a big R behind it. It stands for the name of Jesus Christ. And there we see the anomaly of human life. That anomaly, those tearing forces, can just rip us apart until this is taken up as the sign of Jesus' cross, of Jesus Christ, taken up to his cross. Sometimes, in fact, this symbol, crossed like that, is also known as St. Andrew's Cross and appears as St. Andrew's Cross on the flags of many nations in Europe. So now things become a little more clear, don't they? The contradictions of our lives as called Christians do not disappear as long as we live in this world. And the truth is, we all know that. There are the very hard things. There are the things we want to overcome. There are the things that seem to be tearing us away from Jesus Christ. And in our hearts of hearts, we often like those things, don't we? But we don't want to go in the direction where they might lead us. And so we are crossed with that contradiction, the X, until it becomes the Chi in Jesus Christ. We live in tension, sometimes in real human agony, torn apart by the choices we have to make, not clear what God really wants of us in our lives. As we live together, we then live together as members of the church of Jesus Christ, members of the body that he placed into this world. Maybe we will live well in the world, but we must live in the world and use our wealth for Jesus Christ. We live the life of Jesus Christ, not the life of a wealthy person. Maybe we will live badly in the world. Maybe our fate will not be happy, but we live that fate as members of Jesus Christ. so we live with God's blessing. Otherwise, it makes no sense to hear the truth of Amos's judgment as we heard it read here before. Woe, he says, to you, all of you, those who live well, who have good beds to sleep on in the evening, who like to have a glass of wine once in a while. Sounds like our lifestyle, doesn't it? It is our lifestyle. Woe to you, he says, because of all those in the world who cannot even match what we think is a bare minimum. The truth of the matter is that if we include all the people who are in the roughly $30,000 a year range or $20,000 a year range and add them to it, that those people themselves live in the very upper percentage of wealth in this entire world. That even those of us who feel ourselves somewhat disadvantaged by life stand head and shoulders far above most of the rest of the world. So who are we? Which side of the X do we belong on? Then we hear St. Paul's warning to Timothy about the love of money. In simple terms, he tells us all to live for Jesus Christ, not for ourselves.